Smithson the Werewolf. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have a story for you about a werewolf I used to know back in the 1990s when I was in my 30s and living in Merrill, Wisconsin. I was walking down a path in the Kruger Pines State Natural Area on the west side of town when I saw my old friend Smithson walking toward me. He and I had attended college together back in Milwaukee, and it was quite a surprise to see him where I was. Although we had been inseparable in school, I hadn't seen him in years, so I immediately called out his name and hurried towards him to say hello. As we started chatting, we exchanged our current addresses and phone numbers so that we could get back in touch. After only a minute or two, though, Smithson suddenly began to convulse. I was shocked and horrified as I watched his body twist and twitch uncontrollably. I didn't know what to do, and my mind raced as I tried to figure out how I could help him. I asked him if he was okay, but of course he didn't respond. Instead, he simply continued to convulse and writhe, eventually falling to the ground. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to figure out how to help. Should I call an ambulance? Should I try to give him first aid? I quickly realized that I had no idea how to help someone in the middle of this kind of a seizure. I had never been in a situation like that before, and I felt completely unprepared. In a panic, I looked around for help, but the street was deserted. The nearest hospital was miles away, and there was no one else around to help. I was alone, and I felt completely powerless. I tried to comfort Smithson as best I could, telling him that everything would be okay, and that I was there for him. But he was still convulsing, and I could see his eyes turning an amber kind of color. I felt sick as I saw his face reconstructing itself into something entirely inhuman. And it wasn't just the skeletal structure under the skin that was moving about either. I saw a nauseating dark leather blemish form on his upper lip. Then, as his face stretched out forward, the black leather fit over the end of Smithson's new elongated dog or wolf snout. He now had a black leathery dog nose at the end of rows of teeth fearsome enough to bite through your throat like it was a piece of birthday cake. This was no longer my college chum. In fact, he looked like he was going to turn me into chum. My heart was racing as I watched in horror, and the spasms continued. Smithson's body began to shift and contort, his limbs stretching out and reforming into long, slender legs. A thick coat of fur sprouted from his skin, and his fingers fused to form paws. As if in a dream, I stumbled backward, unable to tear my eyes away from the scene unfolding before me. Smithson was no longer human, but a large, furry dogman with gleaming eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. For a moment I couldn't move, frozen in fear and shock. But then the dogman leaped toward me, its jaws snapping shut. Instinct kicked in, and I turned and ran as fast as I could, the sound of its growls echoing in my ears. He chased and chased. As fast as I could run, it seemed slow to him. When I finally ran out of breath, I turned and looked, and I saw those eyes, those amber-colored eyes. I couldn't look away, as Smithson's eyes seemed to pull me in deeper, almost as if they were vortexes leading to another world. The orange color of his eyes was so vibrant, it was as if they were alive and pulsing with energy. As I gazed into them, I thought I noticed something peculiar. It was almost as if there were tiny flames flickering inside of them, dancing and swaying to a rhythm that I couldn't hear. I felt as though I were peering into the past, present, and future simultaneously, all while being suspended in the abyss of his amber gaze. It was an otherworldly feeling that was both captivating and unnerving, like I was seeing something that I wasn't meant to see. I couldn't help but wonder what kind of secrets were hidden behind those piercing amber eyes, and what kind of power they held. There was something about the orange color of his eyes that made me feel as though I were staring into the heart of a great mystery. They were both beautiful and eerie at the same time, like the eyes of an angel and a demon combined into one. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeply uncanny and otherworldly about Smithson's eyes. They were unlike anything I'd ever seen before, as if they were portals to an alternate reality, a world beyond our own. For a moment, I felt myself being transported to that world, as if the flames inside Smithson's eyes had engulfed me, and I was lost in a sea of orange. But just as quickly as it had come, the feeling disappeared, leaving me feeling strangely empty. As I pulled my gaze away from Smithson's strange eyes, I saw that my old friend was entirely gone, replaced by a beast, like something out of a Hollywood horror picture. The creature's eye level was the same as Smithson's had been, but then I realized it was crouching. Once it unbent its form, all the way to its standing height, I had to crane my neck back to see those orange eyes, now in the skull of a beast unlike anything my eyes had ever borne witness to before. The animal charged at me, all fury and fangs, and I thought my life was over. Both his paws landed hard on my chest, and I began flying backward, my feet up off the ground. I slammed hard on my back as I landed, and then that beast landed even harder on top of me, squeezing all the air out of my lungs, and as I later found out, cracking one of my ribs in the process. But he didn't stick around to eat my face off as I expected, so I was grateful. Instead, he just used me to break his fall, then ran off somewhere behind me. I was painfully gasping for air and feeling pretty bad for some time after that, so I couldn't focus on where Smithson ran off to in his werewolf form. When I got home, I called the number he had given me, and I left a message on his answering machine. Then I collapsed into bed, avoiding my wife's questions of why I looked like I had been in a fist fight. I didn't want to talk to anyone but Smithson about what had happened, and Smithson wasn't really in shape to have a conversation at that moment. And apparently he wasn't the next day either. I called his machine and left multiple messages, but he didn't call me back, so I was thinking that I should call the police and maybe tell them about what happened. I left him one more message saying I was going to do that, and he picked up the phone while I was talking. You could do that in those days before cell phones when we used answering machines. So Smithson started yelling at me that I was being a jerk and interfering with his personal lifestyle, or I don't know, something to that effect. I'm not remembering his exact wording, this is a long time ago. I reminded him that he had thrown me to the ground, and he's lucky I didn't have whiplash or a concussion or something like that. And he calmed down a little bit. I'm not sure he remembered that part, to be honest. We agreed to meet for lunch to talk about it, and I knew a restaurant where we could get a booth in the back and not be overheard by others. Although he did show, Smithson was reticent about divulging too many details about his werewolfism. He kept trying to pull an attitude like I was being rude and I was prying. He kept asking me if I would ask so many questions if he changed his religion or changed his political party affiliation. I laughed at the idea of comparing being a werewolf to voting Democrat or Republican, but he kept doubling down and tripling down on what he called me judging him without walking a mile in his moccasins. I reminded him that werewolves don't use moccasins, and he got up and stormed out of the restaurant. I did try to call him after that, but eventually he either moved or got his phone number changed, and I figured that was the end of our relationship for good. Well, I sort of wish it had been. One night I woke up to hear a tapping on my bedroom window. It was persistent and sometimes got sort of frantic. It was too annoying to sleep through, though, and I began to be concerned that a bird might be stuck or something. I got up and walked over to the window, which was on the third story of an apartment building, and outside. I saw the glowing orange eyes of an upright canine, somehow balancing on a tiny ledge outside that window, far above the ground. I screamed and fell backward into some furniture, and the beast man outside my window simply jumped backward off the ledge. I got up and opened the window and screen, sticking my head out in time to see the werewolf, down 3 floors beneath me, running away on 2 legs into the woods behind our building. He wasn't injured. He wasn't even limping slightly. I didn't know for sure that it was Smithson, but I figured it had to be. He might not have been the only werewolf in Wisconsin, but he was the only one I was having an ongoing argument with. Not long after that, my wife and I were out celebrating our wedding anniversary at a club because she likes to dance. I admit that I had been drinking that night, so I'm not as sure of what I saw that time as I am with the other incidents. I think I saw Smithson. I saw him across the dance floor. I headed over toward him, leaving my wife behind me, because I wanted to have a conversation with that guy to get something straight between us. I am positive I saw him there. Well, pretty positive. But then again, I had been drinking, so maybe it was just someone who looked like him, but when I got to the area I thought I'd seen the man in, women were screaming, and men were trying to catch this very large bat. At least it looked like a bat to me, although it was as big as an eagle or a vulture. I just grabbed my wife and got out of that club before calling us a cab. There was no way I could explain to her what I'd seen. Either I was drunker than I thought, or there was a shape-shifting monster inside that club that was likely to come out front looking for me if I didn't get us away from there fast. Now, at this point, I started to read old books I found in our library about werewolves and other supposedly fictional monsters like vampires. Did you know that in some European traditions, the vampire can change form into animals and creatures? You see it sometimes in the movies when, like, Bela Lugosi or Christopher Lee will become a bat and fly away. Well, another animal associated with vampires is the wolf. Dracula himself refers to wolves as the children of the night, and he calls their howling sweet music. And Dracula is also able to transform himself into a wolf at will, same way he can become a bat. Now, when I read that, it really blew my mind. So Smithson might be a werewolf as I'd been thinking all along, but then again, if that huge bat I saw in that dance club was real, and judging by the screaming women it was, could that have been Smithson? And could Smithson actually not be a werewolf, but a vampire who can turn into a werewolf? Now, to me, the idea that a vampire can also be a werewolf as just sort of a subset of his powers exploded my skull with ideas and possibilities. The more I read about Dogman and werewolves, the more I wondered how many of the Rougarou and werewolf stories might not be about sorcerers who transform themselves into werewolves, but actually about modern-day vampires who do the same thing. I was very excited about these ideas, but my wife absolutely forbids me to discuss any of this with her, so I was feeling pretty crazy, like I needed someone to bounce these ideas off of. No, I don't really want to become a person who believes in vampires, but I was literally faced with an angry werewolf already, so how much further of a jump was it really to begin to suspect that my former friend Smithson might be a vampire? Of course, the implication is that many werewolves in many sightings would then possibly be vampires as well, and that's the part that explodes a lot of the way I used to see the world. I had one more encounter with Smithson, and I hope for the love of God that it was the final one. We moved away from that place, and I'm not even going to hint about where we each moved now for obvious reasons. We had to uproot our entire lives. It feels like we practically live in a witness relocation program. But when I tell you about what happened, hopefully you'll understand our decision. One night we went to the movies, and as my wife and I left the theater, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The street was deserted, and the silence was deafening. I tried to shake off the weird sensation, but there was something in the air that raised the hairs on my arms. Just then I heard a familiar voice call out my name. It was Smithson, my former college buddy, turned enemy. I hadn't seen him for a while, and I was a bit relieved that he was at least in human form. But there he was, bold as brass, staring us down with a cold, dead look in his eyes. "Hello there, old friend," Smithson said, with a devious grin. "It's been too long." I wasn't sure what to say, but before I could even think of a response, something started to happen. Smithson began to shake and convulse right in front of us. His eyes turned yellowy amber orange. His skin stretched and contorted into an eerie shape. Before our very eyes, Smithson turned into a huge, hulking werewolf. My wife screamed, and I tried to shield her from the beast, but it was no use. Smithson had become something beyond anything I'd ever seen. The werewolf was huge, with teeth as long as my fingers, and claws as sharp as knives. It growled at us with a deep, menacing sound that shook me to my core. Smithson, or the werewolf that was once Smithson, started to step closer to us. My wife huddled under my arm, trembling in fear. I knew I had one chance to save us both. With a deep breath, I reached into my pocket, and I pulled out a silver crucifix, my last line of defense. I held it out in front of us, and the werewolf flinched. I wasn't sure if it was because silver was the only thing that can defeat a werewolf, or if it was because a crucifix is considered poison to a vampire. Then again, it might have been for some other unknown reason, but in any case, he didn't like it being shoved in his face. Without a second thought, I lunged forward with my crucifix, thrusting it toward the behemoth in front of us. The werewolf let out a howl, and then it was over. Smithson lay on the pavement, shaking and convulsing, but this time he was human again. I laughed triumphantly, but before I could even finish my chuckle, he was off the ground, and with his right hand tightly around my neck, which was quite painful. I didn't realize at first that his left hand was similarly placed around the neck of my wife. Then he lifted us both off the ground, and our legs swung as he strangled us with his vice-like hands. "Did you think I needed to be in wolf form to show you what I think of you?" he asked me. I couldn't say anything in return. I couldn't even breathe. He could have ended everything for us both. But as we were about to pass out, he dropped us, and we fell to our knees before him. Smithson gloated about how good humans looked when they're on their knees. "It almost made us seem likable," he said. Almost, but not quite. Holding my head up by the chin to make certain I was conscious, Smithson told me that my wife and I had to move out of the state before 24 hours were up. We were never allowed to physically enter Wisconsin again. And then he detailed the terrible things he would do to my wife if I ever came back. My wife said that she couldn't leave because of her job, and Smithson told her that she was going to leave a message for her boss on his phone, telling him things I can't repeat here. Both of us were told to resign in an abrupt, rude, and unprofessional manner over the phone, and then be out of the state before we even made arrangements about where we would stay. And if either of us complained, Smithson said he would only make it worse and worse. Somehow we knew that we were going to do what he was telling us to. We'd be giving up both of our careers and all of our friends and family, and we'd be putting ourselves at financial risk while we drove around jobless and homeless until we were able to put down roots in some new place, which we never really did. Not together, anyway. The stress of all this was too much, and we both took up with different people in different locations. Smithson had broken us up completely. My wife was now scared to even be around me. Whenever we communicate, she asks me if any of my other former enemies have come out of the woodwork yet. And that is the part that really bugs me. Smithson was mad at me. He is probably still mad at me to this day, but all I actually did was leave messages on his answering machine asking him if he was okay. I wasn't prying into his private life. I was inquiring about a man I thought was a friend, who I had just seen suffer a horrible attack. And for that, my wife and I were torn apart, and it took us both years of hardship to create new lives for ourselves. Doesn't seem fair. All I was doing was looking out for an old college buddy, and now I have none of my old friends anymore. I'm afraid to reach out to any of them. I don't want to draw Smithson's vengeful attention to them. And so I have to say, knowing a werewolf is not always all it's cracked up to be. Especially if the werewolf you know is Smithson. We got a nice donation from a nicer bloke. Means I can eat this weekend, and that's no joke. It's a PayPal donation from Godzilla Tim, so I can keep working, all thanks to him. Please join me in thanking Godzilla Tim Walker, who made a truly life-saving donation using our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page, the page where you can make instant donations to us that go directly toward food and necessities so that we can keep the episodes coming out. You can also donate through the thanks button under each of our videos, and we get that money when YouTube pays us once a month, which is awesome too. Whichever way you prefer is appreciated by us, and believe me, it goes right back into the show, or into my belly so I can keep doing the show. We also have cool clubs you can join, the secret uncensored Dogman stories that the public isn't allowed to see. And here to tell you all about that is our international TV spokesmongrel, Henry Lee Dogman. Hank? Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.